Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar on maize and beet crops. It's been, I suppose, I'm delighted that there's so many could join us. It's a perfect time of year to be talking about this, and a perfect day here. The sun is shining beautifully outside, and look, the forecast is good. So for the next week, certainly, like, the opportunity should be there to start doing some field work once ground dries out. Firstly, I suppose just to introduce myself, I'm Dave Barry, and I look after the forage crops and the grassy crops at Goldcrop. So, which entails, obviously, look, we're the biggest seed seller, the biggest seed wholesaler nationally, for all the seeds that farmers require, really from the areas that I cover, but also through all the arable crops that people would look for. This is the busiest time of the year always, and look, it's probably even a little busier this year because of the uncertainty and some things that are out there. Nature normally, it throws up loads of challenges every year, and it's what keeps the whole business, I suppose, interesting, and it's what keeps the room for people like myself and my colleague who's joining me, this morning, Ciaran. But there's new challenges this year, and I suppose what we want to explore to some extent this morning is, can maize and beet be the solution to some of those new challenges that are there? So I suppose, in terms of it being a maize and beet information webinar, there probably are quite a few slides that we'll go through, but it's really to get across the technical information that we feel probably is necessary in terms of explaining what we're covering today. As I say, I'm joined by Ciaran Collins, and I know Ciaran for many, many years. He's a crop specialist with Teagasc and based in Middleton, and has huge experience both in terms of dealing with the industry and farmers and working as a crop specialist, but also coming from an arable farming background and loads of experience in terms of growing all these crops. Just a couple of points on the admin side. The webinar will be recorded, and we will send out a link to everybody later, everyone who registered. And we'll also send out copies of all the slides. And also, in terms of questions, it's any questions along the way. So just go to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in your question. And as we go through the webinar, myself and Ciaran will read out the questions and deal with them as we go. So to start off, I'm going to cover, I'll just start sharing my screen there, and I'll tell you what I'm actually going to cover. So, okay. So look, hopefully everyone can see that. That looks okay, Ciaran, does it?
Yep.
Yeah. So just, I suppose, the areas we want to go through, and we've broken it up between us. So I'm going to cover why maize and beet, and maybe what are the things that make them options for this year. Ciaran will do the nutrient management area. I'll go through the maize plastic options and the variety side of it, which essentially is the Goldcrop bit. And then we'll get an agronomy update and a look at grower and purchaser contracts that Teagasc have been working on for the last few years, just to see if they might simplify the arrangements between willing farmers, I suppose. So look, firstly, what I want to say really is that every year we publish a catalogue that covers all the information on our grass and clover and all the forage crops, including the maize and beet. And so the new version, the 2022 version, is on our website. It's just gone up there today, actually, because we're waiting for some recommended lists for grass to be published in order to get it up there. So you can download that, and it contains essentially all the information that I'm going to go through, including all the costing information and all the variety information. It's all in the catalogue. And also, I would like to say that if you want any further information on anything afterwards, feel free to give me a shout, send me an email. Give me a call. You'll get my contact details on that catalogue, actually, and I'm sure Ciaran is available as well if anyone needs extra information afterwards. So for my part, then, I'll start off with just looking at where beet and maize fit. And look, I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. And like I say, if people want extra information, feel free to give me a shout. But and look, I've been working with beet for a long, long time. My first job was in '91, was working with a sugar company on a fodder beet project. And since then, look, it's always been part of what I've been doing. And maize has been part of what I've been doing for a long, long time as well. So that's the basis, I suppose, for the information that I'm going to give you this morning. So first of all, beet is essentially, in terms of feeding it, it's like a concentrate. So it's really high in energy. It's got all that sugar in it. So about 75% of the dry matter that's in that's in beet is actually pure sucrose, it's pure sugar. And so then in a diet, okay, it has to be managed because it's like rocket fuel to an extent when you put it into the rumen of an animal, and it has to be in combination with a suitable balanced diet. It's low in protein, so in a diet with high-performing animals, you've got to have put in that protein in some other way. And just kind of in terms of how good is it, right? There's been a good bit of trial work, not recently now, but over the years there was a lot of trial work. And Padraig O'Reilly, who has since retired from Teagasc Grange, but was a fantastic researcher, he did a good bit of work on looking at beet and looking at maize in terms of how they feed. And look, there is trial work there, and I have all the slides, but look, there's probably 30 slides in it. But the conclusion is that in terms of beet dry matter, it equates 1-to-1 with barley dry matter, rolled barley dry matter, in terms of the animal performance that you get. And we'll talk about it in a minute in terms of UFL values. Its UFL value reflects that, and that's kind of a measure of the energy that's in something. The other issues with beet, I suppose, there is food preparation required when you feed it to animals. So it certainly needs to be chopped, and ideally it needs to be washed. Now, for many farmers, it'll arrive washed in the yard, hopefully that, you know, they have an arrangement with someone who can deliver it in washed. And then at feed out, because it's like a concentrate feed, you need to have either feed it in a diet feeder where it's mixed with the other ingredients in the diet, or else you need headspace for it all. The same as if you were feeding out a concentrate to animals. So as we go through, I suppose, the maize and the beet topics this morning, we're going to switch between one and the other all the time. And look, that's what I'm going to do anyway, because I want to give the equivalent type of information on both. So then, where does maize fit? So to me, and again, backed up by all the research, and there's significant research done both with feeding dairy stock and feeding beef stock for maize. And it's essentially a roughage feed, and it's a replacement for high quality grass silage. So, you know, good quality maize with 20-something% starch is the equivalent of high quality grass silage. Again, it's a low protein feed, 7 to 9% protein usually. It's a really good complement to grass silage. And if you look back through the trial work, and particularly the dairy trial work, if you had really good grass silage and really good maize and feed the two of them independently and look at the performance of the livestock, and then if you feed a diet of either anywhere between 70% of one and 30% of the other, up to ideally 50-50, you get an improvement in terms of performance. So the sum is greater, or the outcome is better than the sum of what you put into it, because the two feeds complement one another very well, probably in the rumen and probably in the digestive system of the animal. So from that point of view, grass silage and maize work really well together. In terms of feed out with maize, different to beet, it's the same as grass silage. You can put it at a feed face, and there's no extra feeding equipment or machinery required. So then, looking at, I suppose, the options for, you know, in every year, but for the year ahead, really, with both of them, in terms of a livestock farmer, you can decide, do I grow it myself, or do I get it grown, or do I buy it from a tillage farmer who's got maybe the equipment and got the expertise in terms of growing it. So the couple of points there would be that if you're growing it yourself, a good site is essential for both crops, particularly for maize. Really it soaks up the sunshine. You need crop knowledge and access to the machinery. It can be a contractor or whatever. In the year that we having suitable fertilizer available to actually fully feed the crop is important. They're high output crops, and look, they require decent levels of fertilizer then to give that output. Now, Ciaran will cover that side of it in a minute. Look, they fit very well, I suppose, from a livestock farm, and particularly from a dairy farm. They fit very well on an outblock of land that might be used for silage cropping, or from a rented piece of land. So that's growing your own. So then the contract growing scenario, which is very common for both crops, to be fair, and there's lots of local arrangements that work really, really well. So with that, then you can have maize crop delivered to your pit at harvest time, delivered at harvest in silage and ready to go then every day during winter time. What works really well with beet is delivering washed beet, you know, every 2 to 3 weeks, delivering a load or 2 loads or whatever, and then the farmer with the stock can chop it and feed it out each day. So the level of work required in the feeding process is relatively small. So, and again, Ciaran will cover later on the Teagasc grower and purchaser contracts, which will be a very good way of underpinning a relationship there like that between farmers. So then look, we're in a very, very different environment this year to last year. And the thing that's particularly changed is the cost of some of the inputs. And particularly, I suppose, the one that's hit the hardest is fertilizer. So I had costings done up for all these crops, and I had it done 2 weeks ago. And so my fertilizer costings might actually be a little bit low. But at the same time, I'm looking at CAN at probably, I think it was 720, 730 euro, and equivalent high prices 2 weeks ago for the P&K part of the fertilizer. And as I say, all these costings broken down in detail are in the catalogue. But just, I suppose, to put where they are for the year ahead, and with a good bit of what I'm going to do, I'm going to compare to, well, for the next few slides, I'm going to compare to 2 cuts of grass silage, because that's probably the alternative on most farms to these crops. So if you look at maize in the open, I'm putting the cost of the variable costs, including all the machinery part of it and all the materials required, at 770 euros per acre. And that's excluding VAT. With maize with plastic, it's 923. So the extras cover in plastic, a bit extra on herbicide, and a bit extra on the sowing. Beet, and I'm looking at beet that's washed and chopped, so it's ready to feed. So again, it's 1,030, and about 170 of that is to the washing and chopping part of the package. And then the 2 cut silage is 637 euro, including the fertilizer and the machinery part of that. And so then, just to kind of put it into perspective where it is in comparison to the last number of years, if I take my 2021 costings, they're substantially lower. In some cases, you're up by 50% in terms of the cost of growing these crops. And look, in fact, the cost increases at the bottom of the slide. So 240 extra for maize in the open, 250 extra for maize with plastic, 240 for the beet, and 208 for the grass silage. So look, again, this is a substantial challenge that we're all facing in the current year. But what I'll cover in the next few slides is that these options, the maize and the beet crops, okay, everything is gone up. All cropping options are more expensive this year. But these ones are very good value in terms of the spend and in terms of the usage of fertilizer. So look, just in terms of valuing the crops, and look, as I say, there's a significant breakdown done in the catalogue, and I'm just looking at the 4 options. And in terms of the feed value that comes out of an acre of a crop, the figure that I'm most interested, or the value I'm most interested in, is the UFL. So the UFL, it stands for unit of feed per lactation. So it covers, how valuable that feed or how useful that feed is to a dairy animal. But the UFL also covers most of the feeding done to beef animals. And it's only when you really want to add lib systems in beef that there's a different figure. There's a UFB figure. So we'll take the UFL as a good measure of the feed value that's coming out of those foodstuffs. And it's essentially 1 UFL equals the energy in 1 kilo of undried barley. So barley at 15% moisture. So 1,000 UFLs is really a ton of raw barley. So that's the energy that's in it. So in terms of the UFL content of these feeds, and these are standard figures, done up with measurements over the years, 0.82 and 0.84 for the maize options, which are relatively similar to the 2 cut silage option at 0.79. And then beet is 1.15. So in other words, it's essentially the same as the dry matter value that you'd have for roll barley. So that's why we consider that a concentrate. But what's really important here is the UFL yield that you get per acre. I really want this compared to the 2 cut silage situation. So you're at about 3,000 UFLs for the 2 cut silage. You're at significantly more for the maize and the beet options, because they're high yield crops and they're also high quality crops. And then the cost then per essentially the equivalent of a ton of barley, it's 190 with maize, with both maize options. It's 157 with beet, and it's 213 with the 2 cut silage. So that's why really these options, they're always good options, but maybe in a time of scarcity and maybe difficulty with some of the inputs, they fit in really, really well. And then just the other one in terms of I suppose placing them in terms of the current sort of scenario that we have, in terms of the units of, like the recommended units of nitrogen per acre for maize would be 144 and 156 for beet. And that 2 cut silage situation would be 180, we'll say 100 units for first cut and maybe 80 for second cut. And then the UFL yield per unit of nitrogen. So it's significantly higher with the maize and the beet options than it is with two-cut silage. And I know, look, okay, that two-cut silage field will have maybe grazings at the start of the end of the year, but there's more inputs required for that. And look, I'm not taking any costing into account for that. So in terms of what you're getting out of it per unit of fertilizer, maize and beet, they're very good this year, and they've always been very good in terms of the result that you get. And look, this is the kind of the last slide in this section for me, and we go over to Ciaran. But in terms of then, and this graph is in my catalogue, but in terms of valuing the different feedstuffs, and again, I'm looking at that cost per 1,000 UFL. So the cost of a ton of rolled barley equivalent in energy. And so the blue is the actual variable costs. And then the extra bit on the end is if you were renting land at 250 euros an acre, and I know you might say to me, where am I going to get the land at 250 euros an acre? But a year ago, 250 was probably an okay figure to use. It should be probably higher this year. But in any case, look, that's where they come out. So again, the beet and the maize, and again, look at the fodder beet washed and chopped with the two maize options. They come in better than the alternatives that are there, and certainly better than the silage options that are there. So look, with that, that's my first section done. I don't know, Ciaran, if you want to add on.
I was just going to say, Dave, like the figures you use there kind of agree very closely with the Teagasc costs and returns that was published in January, you know. I suppose the concern we all have obviously is the change in fertilizer prices, and maybe for farmers that obviously purchase their fertilizer early, you know, they'll be fine really. But I suppose the concern might be some farmers maybe that didn't buy fertilizer yet, or those costs could increase, but then they will increase for grass silage as well, you know. And I suppose the other point I was going to make is just in relation to feed budgets. Just before this meeting, I was on a call with beef advisors there this morning, and I suppose there is a concern there that, you know, maybe a lot of particular beef farmers haven't all their fertilizer got yet. And I suppose, okay, we hope we won't have a 2018 fodder scenario, but still at the same time, it is important to keep our eye on the ball, and that farmers would do a fodder budget, you know. And I suppose it might feed into the contracts we'll talk about later on, that, you know, that if you don't have access to fertilizer, that you do a fodder budget and maybe set out your requirement for alternatives like maybe maize or beet, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions after coming up there. So I suppose, look, the best thing to do, I suppose, is get you onto the areas you'll cover. But before, I suppose you covered the whole nutrient management area. I know Teagasc did a survey recently in terms of tillage farmers and in terms of their thinking at the moment, and maybe their position and in terms of fertilizer. Can you give us some feedback on that? Maybe it'll shed a bit of light on some of the things that we discussed.
It might help a little bit in the sense, now it's going since last Saturday. It's actually going to close at lunchtime today. So if anybody else wants to do it, it's on the social platforms. But I suppose the idea of the survey was really to try and get an idea of tillage farmers' fertilizer situation in terms of what stocks are on farm and that. So it would appear that I can bundle P and K, I suppose, together. 63% to date anyway have more than 75% of what they require for the season, and that figure is a little bit higher at 70% for nitrogen. So I suppose that's in a good place, I suppose, in that sense. I thought the other one or two interesting ones, and it's not finished yet, but 72% have indicated that they would use organic manure of some description. So again, I suppose that's a recognition, obviously, of the high fertilizer costs. Now, the surveys, it doesn't, you know, say to what extent people would use it. So that's a little bit open, I suppose. And I suppose that one other interesting one there was, you know, if more land became available, more than half the people said that they would increase their area there. You know, so look, I suppose there are some interesting things there that might kind of feed into the conversation later on, Dave, you know.
Okay. And again, look, land is probably the challenge in a lot of parishes of the countryside in terms of, you know, if people do want to expand in terms of accessing more land. Is there likely to be anything from a government point of view or are you hearing anything to try and facilitate maybe movement of land?
Yeah, to be fair, there was a meeting last Friday in Moore Park, and I suppose all the farm organisations, all the interested parties were involved. And to be fair to the Department of Agriculture, they are listening to people. And I suppose they took on board a lot of suggestions, and I don't have any insight into what will happen, but to be fair to the department, they have, they have expressed a sense of urgency, and I suppose in the coming, days, really at this stage, you'd hope that there will be some level of announcement on that, but nothing that I'm aware of yet, anyway.
Okay.
So
right, do you want to go on with the nutrient side of things, so Ciaran?
Yeah, so if I am sharing the right screen there, you can let me know. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Perfect. So I suppose when we were just chatting with Dave beforehand, I suppose in the year that's in it, obviously fertilizer is the big topic, and obviously the price of feed, which obviously feeds into this morning's webinar. And I suppose one of the important things, I suppose, was if you're limited in your fertilizer in terms of whether you can purchase it or not, or obviously the price is limiting for all of us, it's that, where am I going to get best value for that kilo of nitrogen that I buy? Is it growing a field of grass? Is it growing silage? Is it maize or is it beet? So I just looked up the National Farm Survey in terms of nitrogen use efficiency figures. So the nitrogen use efficiency on tillage farms on the 2020 report was 62.5%. Whereas the nitrogen use efficiency, which wouldn't be any surprise, on grassland livestock farms, cattle was 23% and dairy was 25%. So I suppose, that kilo of nitrogen that you use on tillage crops, which does include maize and beet, obviously, is quite efficient. And I suppose, if you think of, just in a cereals context, and it's the same for all crops, but like you get a far bigger response for the first kilo of nitrogen you put out, obviously, rather than the last kilo, where you get near your optimum rates. And just to throw out a figure in cereals, the first kilo of nitrogen gives you about 52 kilos of grain. Whereas, in terms of a response curve, whereas the last kilo is in around, or of nitrogen is giving you only about 6 kilos of grain. So I suppose just important to keep that in mind in terms of, Dave mentioned earlier on that, while we use a lot of slurries and particularly on beet and maize, sometimes I feel maybe do we oversupply some of the nutrients as well. And I suppose this is a year probably to look at that. So what I've done, and I suppose I've really gone to the bargain basement in terms of the absolute sort of minimum requirements to grow beet and maize, and I've incorporated organic manures in it in just a couple of slides that are coming. So if you take organic manures, and the slide is in units per acre, because I suppose it is easier to comprehend when you compare a slurry to a bag of fertilizer. Good cattle slurry at 6% dry matter is giving you the equivalent of 9 units of nitrogen, 5 units of phosphorus, and very high in potash. Obviously they are 32 units per 1,000 gallons. Now, the 39 euros, the value of it there per ton, that's gone up since we put that slide together, because that would be on the older prices. And pig slurry at 4% dry matter, 18 units of nitrogen, 7 units of P and 20 units of K, with a value there in the old fertilizer of 48. But I suppose the crucial thing is the dry matter, and particularly with pig slurry. A lot of farmers have done have got analysis done this year, and a lot of pig slurries, sometimes it can be variable. Some of it can be 4, but some of it can be much less. And I suppose we don't want to get caught out in that. If you've got a hydrometer, that's an ideal thing to have on the farm, or try and get an analysis done, to be sure that what you put out is actually, you're getting good return for your 1,000 gallons. The cattle slurries, I think, seem to be a little bit more uniform in terms of dry matter, and few people have made the comment that, we've had lower rainfall this winter, and I suppose that has helped in that context as well. And I suppose I should also say as well, and I should have said it when I was talking about nitrogen use efficiency, I I mean, applying slurry using the low emissions options obviously is the area that you're going to get the best bang for your buck in terms of retaining that nitrogen. And there's good research in Teagasc to show when you can plow down slurry immediately, or certainly between 4 and 6 hours, that you do retain a very high proportion of the nitrogen versus, say, slurry being applied with a splash plate on a fine sunny day like today, where you have high volatilization losses, you know, and obviously mind the weather as well. We don't want to lose it through leaching. So I suppose I'm presenting, I suppose, a best case scenario. So maybe just to keep that in mind in terms of the recommendations. So just in terms of maize, you know, I'm using the same recommendations there in units per acre that Dave had earlier on, 146 units at index 1. I've taken an index 3 for P and K. So obviously these figures completely change if your soil test result is coming back at index 1 and index 2. So this is for index 3. 3,000 gallons of slurry. You can see what it's giving you there, 2715.96. Being cattle slurry, high potassium there. So it reduces your chemical fertilizer requirement down to the equivalent of just short of 3.5 bags of 10-5 25, and followed up then with 3.1 bags a can. So again, as I say, I am presenting, I suppose, maybe a best case scenario in the season that we're in is utilizing slurry. If you don't have slurry, obviously that changes the whole cost structure of this. Of this, and I suppose just to present maybe just for on the beet, you know, again, the nitrogen requirement there, I think my nitrogen requirement, Dave, might be slightly lower than what you had earlier on. That definitely varies with rainfall, and people in higher rainfall areas certainly could add a little bit to that index 1 figure, 142, a P index 3 again, and for K as well. And again, applying the same amount, the 3,000 gallons of slurry. And again, like in the best case scenario, doing everything right, low emission slurry spreading or plowing in that slurry immediately, you know, you can reduce your recommendation there down to, you know, 3.4 bags of B compound there, say 8,518, followed up by 3.2 bags a can. So, you know, looked at maybe the 8,518s mightn't be available, but again, you can mix and match with what's available this season. And Dave, if I might just one last slide on the nutrient side of it, you just reminded me in terms of the boron and beet, and I think it's something that we're seeing a little bit more of. And this year, you'd obviously be concerned if people are reducing fertilizer input, or maybe can't get boron in the compound, just to be aware that, you know, boron is so important in sugar beet, and it readily leaches from soil. You know, soils, especially light soils, have a poor holding capacity in terms of boron. So you need a soil, you know, if your soil test is less than 1 milligram per litre, you need to supplement. Ideally, you'll be getting about 3 kilos of that on in the fertilizer, followed by a foliar top up. The recommendations I actually give you there would struggle to give you that in the fertilizer. So again, I suppose just the awareness, if you're not getting it in your fertilizer, to use, you know, the foliar options, the likes of, just use an example there, Solibor DF at 5 kilos per hectare, but that would need to be repeated twice or maybe 3 times during the season, depending on, I suppose, your starting point there. So Dave, that's just I suppose.
Just while you're on that, yeah, look, I actually, while you were going through the beet fertilizer there, I'd written boron down in front of me, because I was going to ask you about this. So again, and I would concur exactly with what you say, that boron is a really critical nutrient for beet crops. And what I've seen over the years is that where, you know, 25 years ago, a sugar beet crop might yield, a really good crop might yield 20 tons. I know that people with sugar beet with Alicia sown last year, in some cases, did 35 tons. So the offtake of all the nutrients, but particularly the boron, is much higher maybe than it was before, because the varieties now and the crop management that people are using is allowing that. So again, I want to really emphasize that the make sure enough boron goes on. If someone doesn't have a boron fertilizer, which may happen this year, like what would you suggest to them in terms of their foliar treatment afterwards?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a stage process through the season, really, and I suppose it depends on the concentration. I gave a look last night, and there's a whole myriad of different boron products on the market, but I suppose just keep an eye on the concentration, you know, that you're getting enough on. And I think it's a kind of a stage through the season. But I suppose traditionally, when we put it out in fertilizer, often people didn't do that top up until they were putting out the fungicide. And I think if it's not in the fertilizer, you just need to start earlier this season. That would be my advice on it anyway. And certainly it would be 2 applications. And I suppose depending on your soil test report, and if you haven't the soil test done, there's still time to do it. You have to ask for boron specifically. And I think it's worth doing if you're growing beet, given the value and the investment in the crop. You know, it would be a shame to fall at a kind of a relatively easy fix in boron if you know, so maybe get that in the soil test report.
Yeah, and look, I would say, look, solid bore to me is probably the product of choice because it has a high concentration of boron and there's a high application rate allowed, and it's a cost-effective product. And I would think that, you know, you need definitely three applications of solid bore if no boron fertilizer went out, with the first one gone in nearly with the last weed spray, and then follow on maybe a month later, and then do it in the July-August period as well. Because I've seen plenty boron deficient crops in the last 10 years. And again, it's because, and it's where, look, everyone had done what they always done, or done what they thought was correct, and supplied everything they thought, but because maybe of the output of the crop, and in good growing years, it can just be not enough. There was one question just as we were going along there. So it's in terms of maize. So where a farmer has 5,000 to 6,000 gallons of slurry available for a maize crop, how much will that bring down his fertilizer cost? I know it's kind of there might be calculations needed to answer it.
There certainly is, and yeah, like, I mean, if you take the figure there, it was a cattle or pig slurry? Cattle, I think the question was it? So like
slurry,
1,000
slurry, yeah.
Cattle, yeah, like 1,000 gallons, the equivalent of 9,532 in you know, in a best case scenario that I keep kind of saying there. So I suppose just be maybe careful in terms of the overall amount as well, you know, and maybe I suppose the soil index would be important to remember as well, in terms of, you know, if it's an index 1 or 2, obviously you're going to get a better response, and for the very high levels, that's where you'd be targeting. Maybe at an index 3, maybe you wouldn't have that same requirement, because you're actually supplying all your requirement there, I'd imagine, at that level. Like.
Yeah. Okay, look, a lot of the information on a lot of those things, it's either available for Teagasc or it's available in our own catalogue. Okay, so well, I can move on next, I suppose, and cover the maize plastic and also the variety options. So again, I'll share my slides. Okay. So yeah, just covering and looking, I look at maize first, and then I look at beet. In terms of, I suppose, you know, the key inputs for both crops are obviously, if you're using plastic with maize, that's one, and then obviously the seeds. And just, I suppose, to frame where the national area is with maize, and look, the figures from 2016 up to 2021 are all there, and they're based on the Department of Agriculture figures, which is based on Area 8 figures, which obviously gives us a very accurate picture of what's happening out there. So last year there was 14,400 hectares of maize, down slightly from the year before. In 2018 there was a big increase based on the fodder challenge that we had that year, which was really essentially coming from a drought scenario. And then some of that acreage held on in 2019, and then it went back to kind of the more normal levels in 2020 and 21. But it's up from 16 and 17 was 11,000 hectares. So the level now is higher, and, you know, partly maybe due to the higher dairy cow numbers that are in the country. And so just the feedback that we've had as I suppose, a seed supplier into the market, I would expect that the area of maize, my expectation is that it'll be something similar or up maybe 5 or 6%, and that's based on just the information to date. And look, if circumstances have changed for people, maybe that'll be different. So then, just in terms of looking at plastic, just one sec. So, plastic has been, you know, a key part of maize grown in the last 20 years, and up to up to now, I suppose in the last kind of 5 or 6 years, there's probably 90% of the crop that's grown is grown with plastic. But the plastic situation is changing. And so look, this year, the options are, there's 3 options really. There's growth without plastic. And again, look, the area without plastic increased last year, and I expect it to increase this year. There is, and we'll look at these in more detail now in a sec, but there is the photodegradable plastic, which is the plastic we've all been using for the last 20 years. That is available for this year. And there's also the new product, which is essentially a compostable or biodegradable plastic. That's available this year for the first time, really on a wide basis. So then in terms of the different things that are involved in each of the options, so with maize in the open, and if you go back 20 years ago, there was probably 20,000 hectares of maize being grown, and most of it was in the open. And because of the benefits that the plastic brought, a lot of the area transferred into growing it with plastic. But there's still, as I say, look, 10 or maybe last year, maybe 15% of the maize that was grown in the open. And there's a few key things that are essential. One is it has to be a good site. It just has to be. And a good site in a good year will give a fabulous crop. A good site in a bad weather year, lower temperatures and maybe lack of sunshine, will give an okay crop. A bad site in a good year, so a poor site in a really good year, it'll still be an okay crop, but in a poor year, it'll be terrible. It'll just be a waste. It'll be a waste of the inputs that went on the crop. So that's why the site is so important. So the things you'd be looking for are sheltered, first of all, particularly from easterly winds or southeasterly winds in the 6 weeks after sowing. Ideally, the warmer the better, because maize, it's a different type of grass crop to normal cereals. And so as the temperature goes up, it keeps increasing its output and its growth rate based on the extra heat units that are available. So heat is very important. Good fertile deep soil, because it likes to root deep and it's good at scavenging for nutrients and moisture deep in the soil. South facing to get the best of the sunshine. Well drained, and that's particularly, I suppose, at harvest time. You want to feel that you don't want the crop in with wet legs in the spring, and you don't want it in a bog in the autumn when you're cutting it, so that you don't destroy the place. And look, again, to get that heat and sunshine and temperature less than 300 feet over sea level or 100 meters over sea level is where you'll find those kind of sites. Now, I would say that the varieties that are available are improving all the time, and we have some good new options this year for uncovered maize. Like we have our main variety, or key variety for the uncovered market was Ambition has been and is still Ambition. And it's been it was a real step ahead when it came along as a variety and beat every other variety easily. And it's only now that we're finding varieties that are better than it. But we have a few new offerings. I don't have very much seed of them, but we just want to get them into the market and get them out on farms. So that's Maize in the open. Then if we look at the plastic that we've all been used to, the photodegradable plastic, the whole system was perfected over 20 or 25 years. That product, because it's a single-use plastic, has now, since last July, has been banned within Europe. But that the stock that's in the market at the time on the 1st of July last year is allowed to be sold and allowed to be used as long as it's there. So from what I hear or what I know, there is enough stock to cater for 1 to maybe 2 years of the crop requirement in the country. There is an increase in cost this year, all right. So it's I suppose similar to a lot of other inputs, the cost of this plastic, it looks like it's gone up about 20% for the plastic itself. And then look, the last point there, once it's gone, it's gone. So look, let's enjoy the last couple of years of using this particular product, and then we'll have to look at the other options that were there. And the next slide is kind of the plastic option of the future. So what's there is a compostable or biodegradable plastic. So it will degrade. It'll degrade once it's on, once it's on the crop, and it doesn't need light to degrade. It degrades by essentially the bugs in the soil, and the normal processes that degrade plant material will degrade this plastic in the crop. Firstly, I suppose I would like to say it is essentially unproven in that I haven't seen any independent trials of the product that's there. Just to show us exactly how it compares with the existing plastic or how it compares with uncovered crops. It is expensive. Now, for this year, particularly in an effort to get the product rolled out and get people trying it, there is a subsidized price from, certainly from one of the suppliers, a subsidized price is going to operate for this compostable product. And the subsidy is essentially brought about by putting a price increase on maybe on the photodegradable plastic. But essentially you'll be able to buy the compostable plastic at the same cost per acre as the photodegradable product. But in real terms, in a year or two, you'll be looking at probably 60 or 65% more expensive when you're buying the compostable product. So the product available this year it's the same width roll as the standard rolls, so it'll fit all the existing machinery. The product degrades quicker, which is it's positive from the point of view of having no plastic residue on the field after your maize crop, but it's gone off the crop more quickly, and therefore the crop is exposed to the weather more quickly. And if you get late frost, it could be an issue. And then the advice from that point of view is don't sow too early. Don't put yourself in that high risk situation of worrying about late frost coming. The plan for the future from Samco is to have a narrow band plastic that covers one row of maize. And so the amount of plastic required per acre will be reduced, and therefore it'll reduce the cost of the plastic per acre. But I would say that whole system will need to be validated. So it needs to be trialed and compared with the existing plastic and compared with uncovered to see if the expense involved is paid for, and that you're getting that extra reliability in terms of crop performance that we got with the photoplastic. So I would say if you're using plastic in 2022, certainly some of the field should be devoted to the compostable product. And I think the industry has kind of a target of maybe 5% of the plastic that's used this year being that compostable product. So I'll just move on into the variety part of it. And the variety part of it, I suppose, is the really important bit from Goldcrop's perspective. And what I have up on screen there is the current recommended list of maize varieties. And the ones, I suppose, that we have and that we supply to the market are the ones in yellow. So we have Ambition, we've Spicy, and we've Feedy Top. So look, the early and the medium maturity varieties on the recommended list are all from us. Ambition is, look, it's very early maturing. It suffers in yield then essentially because of that. So what I would say is, look, if you're on a slightly more marginal site, or if you want to harvest the crop early, then Ambition is a perfect variety for that scenario. It's got a really super starch content at 118 and much better than any other variety on the list. So while your yield is down, your starch yield may be better than some of the other options that are there. And the dry matter content figure here is just indicating the earliness of the variety. So the next two then in terms of earliness are Spicy and Feedy Top. And there is a significant supply of Ambition seed, not so much for Spicy and Feedy Top, but we have seed available, but not a huge amount. And again, these varieties are again more reliable in terms of a bad weather year because of their early maturity. Moderate sites, or if it's not the absolute best site, these varieties, the three that we have essentially are the ones that fit best. And in the later heading group, then you've got the LG 31235 is actually not available this year, but you've got P8201, P8200, and Confluence. And then we have a new variety that we're offering this year for under plastic. And again, look, all this information is in the catalogue, but it's had 2 years of Department of Agriculture recommended list trials. And so its performance in comparison to the material that's on the recommended list is as I've listed here. So again, in terms of yield, in dry matter yield, it stacks up really, really well at 107. In terms of earliness, it fits in with the Spicy Feedy Top type varieties, but it's got a very good starch content as well. So it's got 2 years of Department of Ag trials across all their sites. So I'd be very confident in terms of the performance of that variety. I don't have a huge amount of seed because again, it's being introduced essentially a year before it gets fully recommended. And then what I expect to be a bigger share of the market this year is maize being grown uncovered. And like Ambition has been our star variety for the last 7 or 8 years and was the star variety on the last recommended list that was published. Now, the department have been back doing recommended list trials, screening the uncovered varieties in the last 2 years. And based on those figures, that's where Ambition stacks up. And then Saxon has 1 year done. And so that variety looks very useful as well. And we have a very good variety, or a very useful looking variety, Foxtrot, that we're introducing this year. It's based on Goldcrop trials so far. Again, I don't have a lot of seed, but I do want to get some of it out on farm. But this is the one that I'm talking about when I say a step ahead of where ambition set the bar. So it's very good in yield, as good or maybe slightly better in starch than ambition, and even a little bit earlier. And look, stands a bit taller in the field, so looks impressive in terms of its field performance. So again, look, that's a quick run through the maize side of things.
Dave, if I could throw one in there, maybe just growers might be saying, you know, in view of plastic, the cost of it, number one, and obviously the fact that it's on the way out, that's the oxidogradable plastic. Yes. Is there any, were you saying the old days, you know, say uncovered versus covered, there might be about 3 tons of dry matter in the difference? Have we any indication of where that would be now, or have the uncovered varieties come a bit closer, or what's your feeling on that one?
Yeah, look, I still look, while there's been improvements in the uncovered varieties, there's also improvements in the covered varieties. So my figure again, and look, it's hard to get an exact precise figure for the yield improvement you're getting, because the weather in particular years has a significant effect on it. And so we would look back through all the data, and I generally look at the recommended list trials to try and come up with a figure, and also any other relevant data that we can get. But I would still say that you're looking at per hectare, €3 of extra dry matter per hectare. So you're looking at about maybe 1.2 or 1.3 tons of extra dry matter per acre is kind of still the figure I'd be using. And that yield then, that extra yield is sufficient then to cover the extra costs associated with it, including fertilizer, little bit of extra for herbicide, bit of extra for the actual sowing operation itself. The challenge in future though is that if with a new type of plastic, if you're not getting that level of yield improvement, and if the cost, the extra cost is actually more, then I'm not so sure will the mathematics all add up. That's the challenge. But trial work and independent assessment of the new products will deliver the answers on that. We just need to hopefully look, enough of that work will be done this year so that by this time next year we can answer those questions. Okay. So again, just continuing on, I'll just go through the beet side of things, and look, in terms of looking at the area sown, in 2021, there was 1,000 hectares, 9,100. And then just up from 9,000 in 2020, 9,600 year before. And again, in 2018, there was a significant increase based on the fodder situation that year again. But you're sort of saying, look, between 9,000 and 9,500 is the area of beet over the last number of years. This year, and look, just going on really the feedback in the last couple of weeks, that certainly there is potentially up to maybe 10% of an increase kind of being planned, and certainly on some farms anyway. So I would expect that the beet area will be up somewhat this year. In terms of varieties, we would have the biggest, I suppose, range of varieties in the market, and also the biggest area sales or market share in terms of the seeds that we sell. We have 2 new varieties this year, and look, there isn't a recommended list with beet, but we have been carrying out trials every year. And look, our ambition really is to find new varieties that are better than what's on the market, bring them to market when we have enough information about them to be very sure that they'll deliver on what we're saying. So we've had Gusta, which is essentially a new fodder beet. It comes from KWS, which are, you know, very, very good, and probably they're the biggest, I suppose, beet variety breeder in the world, and significant shares of the sugar beet markets worldwide, but also in the fodder beet area. So Gusta is a high dry matter fodder beet. It's higher in dry matter than Enermex and Magnum. It's kind of in between those varieties and the sugar beet varieties. So resting at about 21% dry matter. So it's white, it's a sugar beet type, so it's a sugar beet lookalike, but really good fresh yields, really good dry matter yields. And okay, it's a white root. It'll fit in very well to a lot of growers that are growing white roots at the moment. This one fits really well, and I would suggest well worth trying some of that this year. We had some of it out on farm last year, and the feedback from everyone was good. So that's what gives us confidence, along with having it in our own trials for 3 years. The other variety that's new this year is Smart Janinka, which is a Conviso beet variety. So we have 2 Conviso varieties that we're offering this year. This variety, most of the market last year was Smart Sanya. This variety, Smart Janinka, its performance is relatively similar, but it's a bit better on disease, and particularly root disease. So then just, I suppose, summarizing all the varieties that we offer, and this table is in the catalogue again. And just a quick mention of each of them now, because they all have their own place in the market. So in terms of sugar beet, it's Alicia. And again, when we found that variety, it was better than anything we'd had before. And it's been, whatever, 3 or 4 years now, and I can't find anything as good yet. And I will find in the next year or two, maybe. But this is a kind of a standout variety that particularly suits Ireland. The leaves aren't enormous, but they'll tend to be still very healthy at harvesting time in November and December and January. They tend to be there. They tend to be the greenest thing in the fields at that time of the year, in fact. So they do tend to hang around well for harvest. The Conviso beet, and I'll cover that one a little more in a sec, but Smart Janenka and Smart Tanya are the two varieties. And look, as I say, I'll cover it in a little more detail in a minute. They're both sugar beets. Our biggest selling variety is Enermax. And look, it's a high yielding variety. And when I'm categorizing yields, look, that's the one I'm judging everything else on. So this figure, the relative root dry matter yield, that's in terms of feed, the amount of food you're getting per acre, essentially. The fresh yield is essentially the fresh tons that come out the gate. So I'm saying Enermax is, look, it's one of the best varieties in terms of fresh yield. The only ones that beat it are the medium dry matter varieties. And that's because there's more water in them. Gusta fits in very well with that. So it's a bit better on dry matter yield and about the same on fresh yield. And then we have Cagnote and Magnum to offer. And we also have in the medium dry matter segment, which is a much smaller segment of the market now, it might be only 10 or 12%, Geronimo, Bolero, Robus, and then Jaman for grazing in the field. And just look to categorize them in terms of maybe what's important to farmers. Like if you're growing it to sell it, maybe fresh yield is the most important thing. And in that case, then if I'm saying Enermax is doing 35.7 ton, this is where the rest stack up. So the only two that will be fresh yield better are the ones, the medium maturity varieties. But Enermax now is joined by Gusta, and Alicia is very near as well. And look, in time, the sugar beet type varieties will go ahead because they have been getting better all the time. So, and look, the performance here is, look, it's typical on farm performance in the last couple of years because we've had 2 really good years for beet. And look, the smart beets are over on the right-hand side of the screen, but you could say, look, most of these varieties here from Enermax over to Smart Sanya, they're all white roots and there isn't that much difference in terms of the fresh yield. But when you look at dry matter yield, there is a bit of a difference in that Alicia is certainly the best. Then comes the Conviso varieties, then comes Gusta, and then comes Enermax. And look, if you're growing beet to actually feed your livestock, this is the slide that should be of most interest because that's the one that tells you how much feed value is in it. So then just, I suppose, and look, I'd always say different varieties for different scenarios. So if you're growing it for yourself, home use washed, then it's the Alicia and the Gusta and the Enermax that fit best. Home use and not washing, I would say pick a clean variety. So go for the ones that sit higher out of the ground. So Geronimo, Cagnote, Bolero. If you're trying to sell white roots, and look, there's no great issue about which one it is, then go for the highest fresh yield. So it's Gusta, Enermax. And look, Alicia and Conviso varieties are coming in near enough there as well. If you can get a premium for sugar beet, absolutely grow Alicia or the Conviso varieties. If it's been sold and it doesn't matter what color it is or what dry matter content it is, go for the highest fresh yield varieties. So it's Geronimo, Bolero. And for grazing then, the Jaman and the Geronimo and Bolero, and we have another one there, Robus, they're all perfectly suitable for that. So that's the whole variety area. In terms of, I suppose I would like to say, look, in terms of seed availability, it is important that, look, once you know what you're doing or once farmers know what they're doing, hook the seed. Put your name on it as soon as you know what you're going to do, just in case there is, scarcity. Now, I don't expect there will be, or at least if people go ahead and book the seed relatively soon, there's plenty of time to get in more seed into the market. But there is seed enough to deal with, almost all the acreage expectations I was mentioning a while ago, but it's worth doing. So just the last thing I want to do is I just want to give you a quick run through Conviso, and this will be quick now. It'll just be a minute or two. And while I have a few slides for it, there's only one message on essentially some of the slides. And look, some people may not be familiar with this, but there was a project ongoing between KWS as sugar beet seed breeders and Bayer as a chemical company over a 15-year period to develop new varieties that would be resistant to sulfonylurea herbicides to allow really good weed control and maybe solve some of the problems that are in beet-grown fields and in beet-grown areas of the world. So they certainly perfected it. And so what you have then is you have a combination of specific seed varieties and a specific herbicide. Now, this herbicide the Conviso 1, it's called, if it's applied on a conventional crop of beet, it will kill it stone dead. So, or even a tiny trace of it in a sprayer will kill a field of conventional beet. So it's very important that, look, these things are used together and used properly. And I would say the Conviso varieties, on the other hand, they can be sprayed with conventional herbicides if necessary, but the Conviso 1 herbicide will do a better job. And then what the package is really, you sow your beet as normal, and then the herbicide, this Conviso 1 herbicide, is either applied as a split application. There's 1 litre going to be applied per hectare. It can go on as a half litre in 2 applications, or a 1 application of 1 litre. And if it's the 1 application of 1 litre, when the main weeds in the field and fat in is taken as a kind of an indicator weed, when they have 4 true leaves, go ahead and do it. The herbicide has a significant residual effect, so it will then keep that crop weed free for 8-9 weeks, the same sort of period of time you get protection from with a standard herbicide program. In terms of the weeds that are controlled, and I look, it's just a quick look at this slide, and the message is really that the control level is very, very effective. And you can see there that the level of control of almost all the weeds is very, very high. The one at the end, common field speedwell, is certainly one of the problems that we see in fields that might need a bit of extra attention. Chickweed that's resistant to SUs is another, and maybe RH is another. And thistles, they're essentially the ones. And for those, it's an addition of something like Goldcrop or maybe a shield to the tank, and that will cover the requirement. So the point I'm making here is very broad spectrum control, and also very broad spectrum control of grass weeds. So the one herbicide is started doing everything for you. And look, this slide I think is important because look, one of the problems in beet fields, or in maybe fields that could grow beet in the countryside, is that there's big weed beet populations there. So this herbicide will absolutely control weed beet, no problem whatsoever. It's a super solution to that problem in a field. Even if it's a fairly mature plant, it still controls it, no problem. One of the other advantages of it, because these varieties are not affected by Conviso spray, the crop effect, the picture on the left really is the unaffected plant, and the one on the right is kind of a plant after a more normal herbicide. So the crop it's completely crop safe. Really important not to allow any weed beat of the Conviso plants to develop in future, and that's a combination of pull any bolters and kill any ground keepers that are in the field. And so it's a non-SU herbicide that you'll be using for that, and 2,4-D and MCPA are the best at that. But again, look, if someone's interested in this, give us a shout. But the summary of it is really that by using the 2 products, okay, you can solve difficult weed problems if you field with difficult weeds, or a weed beet problem. It's a super solution to that problem. And the overall cost per acre of the seed cost plus the herbicide is about the same as normal seed plus a tree spray program. So look, that kind of covers that part of it, Ciaran. I don't know if you have any points that you want to raise out of that, or do we have any questions after coming on screen there?
Yeah, I've seen the crop safety bit for me is something that kind of sticks out when you see, a part field or something, and you certainly, it does get a little bit more growth after being sprayed, And I suppose the other one that sticks out, I suppose, is just to be aware of the resistant chickweed. I think, I don't know, we don't have any hard facts on it, but from walking crops, I think resistant chickweed is more common now than it was. Is probably the majority of chickweed, I would feel, that's out there, Yeah.
And just to comment on that, look, if I like the 2-spray program because it gives you more flexibility in terms of getting the timing right for that first spray. Like if you're waiting for a 1-spray program and you're waiting until the leaves have 4 true leaves and you get 10 days bad weather, you can be in trouble. So the 2-spray program gives you more flexibility. But if you have then those speedwells or the chickweed, Goldcrop or etofumicate gone in with the first spray will usually solve the problem. And if not, you can top it up again in the second spray. So they're very solvable problems. And again, look, if people want more information, just give us a shout. I see one question there actually. There's a question on where could someone get higher nutritional information on different varieties? Does high yield translate sometimes to lower nutritional value? So it could be either crop, but in terms of look, I suppose in terms of maize crops, I would always say, once you've got your crop in the pit, get it analysed, send it to the lab and get a proper analysis done for what you actually have yourself. Because while we have all the recommended list information, the information is essentially a summary of the previous 3 years of recommended list trials. And in some cases, look, the weather effects can be significant in terms of how good particular varieties are, in terms of the starch content, or in terms of the overall, yield effect of the weather. So I would say best bet is, use the recommended list information and nutrition as a guide, but get your sample tested. With beet, kind of the most, in terms of nutritional performance, it tends to be, look, the most important thing to test is, or to know, is the dry matter content, because what's in the beet tends to be consistent. If you have a good yield or a bad yield, the kilos of dry matter tend to analyze out similarly. So it's definitely important to know what variety you're feeding, and there's no question, but if you're feeding a sugar beet at 23% dry matter in comparison to, say, an Enermex at 19% dry matter, well, then there is a significant extra amount of feed in every ton of the sugar beet, because there's more dry matter in it and there's less water. So to the tune of sort of 23, it's to the tune of probably 16, 17% more feed value per ton. That's what it works out to. Just see another question there. Are seeds of Canvisa variety likely to be shorter or longer lived in the soil than conventional seeds? Okay, so I'm wondering, is that okay? Just in terms of probably weed seeds that might be returned. So look, in terms of their life in the soil, they're likely to be about the same, because it's the same physiology of the seed itself. The problem is, if we end up with weed beet of Canvisa varieties, the big challenge with them is that sulfonylureas will not kill them. So while the conventional beet, weed beets that are out there, when those weed beets germinate in a cereal crop, no one even has to think of a special spray to control it, because we know that the standard herbicides used on cereal crops will easily take care of it. But if you have bolters and weed beet to a Canvisa variety, you could have a more challenging situation. Now, generally, look, the herbicides are there, no problem to control it, but it just might need a little bit of attention when you're deciding on what you use. So definitely, we don't want Canvisa weed beet in the countryside, because it would also mean that those fields are off limits for any type of beet in future. One more question then. What is the best value for a dairy farmer to buy beet or maize? And look, I'd say my answer to that really is, I go back to my first couple of slides. I consider beet a concentrate, and I consider maize a silage replacement. So it depends what you're actually looking for. And after that, it comes down to what sort of pricing is operating in the market for them. And there's a good calculator on the Teagasc website, or at least I assume it's still there, in terms of putting values on those feedstuffs based on, and it uses the rolled barley price and the soybean meal price, and it'll give you an accurate nutritional value to take into account the energy and the protein component of maize and of beet. So I'll turn over to you, Ciaran, and just in terms of the agronomy side of things.
No bother. Hopefully we're on the right screen there again. Yeah. You can see that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to make this kind of short enough, really, I suppose, just to maybe highlight 1 or 2 points on each slide. I suppose, look, the first thing is, every year we all get, when should I sow, so, and I suppose particularly for maize, I suppose you can go a little bit earlier with fodder beet at times, but certainly you need a minimum soil temperature of 8 degrees. So when you look at the 30-year average there, you're well into April you're into April, out of March anyway, for most sites there. So I suppose, again, like Dave said, there will be differences between sites, whether they're south facing or favorable sites or not. But, I suppose we've all seen maize that, was planted a little bit early and then it goes purple and, with the cold, as we say. So again, just keep an eye on soil temperatures, and it's not one day, it's consistent over a number of days before you start doing it. But anyway, that's a fortnight away or more for most people anyway. So just in terms of the beet weed control, really, I suppose just 1 or 2 points here. We all know beet's a poor competitor. You know, desmethamphetamine is no longer available. It wasn't available last season either. That would have been a component in the likes of, for argument's sake, Beetnol Max Pro. And I suppose the one message I really have in terms of weed control in beet is there's 2 things. One is correct weed identification, that you tailor your program to the weeds that you see in front of you, you know, and the timing is just crucial. You know, there really isn't any forgiveness for, you know, we've all walked into a field where, you know, it's gone late and it's really difficult to pull it back. So I suppose for me, it's kind of expanded cotyledon stage, really, I would say is the ideal time. Also watch the flush of weeds, you know, when that first flush of weeds comes, which invariably, if there's brassicas present, like the charlock, raunch, volunteer rape, which is increasingly difficult to control, you know, once you start to see that first flush, you know, to get in there straight away. You know, I suppose the fenmedaphine just will replace desmethamphetamine in a lot of the herbicide mixes. But I suppose, again, just to be careful in terms of matching the rate to the weed size, really, you know, especially if you're getting in early. Just in terms, I just put this slide together there last year, and just I maybe, if you, depending on what weeds you see in the field, and maybe to tailor the program then, or the product that you're using for those weeds. But I would say in a very general sense, you know, especially when you're dealing with brassicas, that debut program, or certainly using debut in the first timing, will be probably the program for 90% of growers, you know, because if you don't control brassicas early, you know, it is very hard to get them. And we can do a very good job on brassicas, even difficult oilseed rapes, but it's just timing is so crucial, and good growth in the crop as well. So it's that first application getting on, you know, at that expanded cotyledon stage. And then the second, you kind of would say 10 to 14 days, but that's really dependent on growth. Sometimes it'll be a bit sooner. I suppose you're watching the beet as well and how well is it recovered, but generally, I suppose within 10 to 14 days. I won't go through all the other products, but that first time it would normally be a debut type program with Lenacel, with Venzor mixed in there as well, with penmedaphine the first time. Oil or not will really depend on the size of the beet. And just on maize, I suppose, look, maize again, a really poor competitor, a bit of work done by Richie Hackett. It's a bit old now at this stage, but it's still very, very valid, you know. And, you know, up to 80% reduction in yield when weeds aren't controlled. And I suppose the key point from that trial was that maize needed between 30 and 50 days of weed-free after sowing to avoid a yield penalty, you know. So again, for those under plastic, it's pre-em, knowing the weeds again, hopefully that will occur, and tailoring it there. In terms of herbicides, and I suppose the glyphosate goes for both maize and beet, obviously, but, you know, getting glyphosate on to control, particularly in maize, those perennial weeds, your docks, thistles, those awkward ones to control, you know, is vital. I gather, Dave, that pendimethalin might be, stocks could be a little bit tight this year, but, you know, the kind of normal scenario under plastic is that kind of wing pea topped up with a bit of Stomp Aqua or Calaris, which can be used both on the label for both pre-emergence, and it's obviously the main option for post-emergence there. So Calaris with Stomp Aqua, just to Stomp Aqua giving you that residual component there. And then in crops in the open, it will generally be Calaris, maybe at the 4 to 6 leaves stage there. Plus or minus the likes of Floxipire, which you get in Hurler or Pastor Trio. You might be targeting maybe the likes of Docks there in particular, I suppose. Ascent is useful if you've got a lot of brassicas in particular, or obviously its main purpose is on grass weeds. So look, that's just I suppose a general sense, but I understand that the pendimethalin products mightn't be overly available, so just maybe order on time, I suppose, is the kind of message on that one. And Dave, just my last one for me here is just on the forage contracts. In 2018, Tom Curran and a few people in Teagasc drew up forage contracts, and I suppose it was And like it's protection, as I say in the slide there, for both the grower and the purchaser. You know, the costs now are really high, as we saw on the very first slides here. And like no grower wants to be left with maize or beet on hand. I mean, he may not even have stock themselves. And then from the purchaser's perspective, you know, if you've done your feed budget and you know your requirement is for, you know, whatever 50 tons of maize or whatever it is, you know, you need to have some certainty that you're going to get that, especially in the current climate with the price of feed at the moment. So I suppose it's protection for both. It can be as broad or as narrow as you want, but I would say the minimum really is to agree the price and a payment structure. And again, I think it's kind of accepted at this stage, you know, for particularly the likes of maize, a kind of a 3-stage payment, maybe one when the crop is being sown, you know, one mid-season, and then when it's delivered after. And again, I think that's fair for both sides, and I suppose it gives us security on both sides as well. And I suppose the contract then can be broadened. Like, I mean, the specific area can be, or a tonnage can be agreed, but you can also like put in other terms and conditions, even in terms of variety. I was interested there to look at, you know, the likes of Ambition maize, like that, okay, it might be low fresh weight, but, you know, you certainly might be getting a higher starch yield, and, you know, that might be your requirement. So again, you could specify that and maybe tailor the price then to suit, rather than just buying, you know, fresh weight as such. And the same with beet. Maybe, again, you know, some of the higher dry matter sugar beets mightn't have the same fresh weight yield, but again, maybe buy tons of dry matter instead of fresh weight tons. You know, you can specify, you know, site or soil test report. All of those can be detailed on the contract. And I suppose another crucial one for me is many tillage farms are crying out for slurry, and like it's a great opportunity for exchange of, you know, slurry going one way and the maize or the beet going the other way. So again, I think that's something that can be worked in, and it should be worked in, especially in the current era. And again, remember the bang for your buck. You know, you're getting very good utilization, nitrogen use efficiency from slurry when you're using it to grow beet and maize, you know, rather than maybe putting it out later in the season. So Dave, that's kind of, for me, there's a link there on the slide. I can share it with you after, maybe if people want to get onto the Teagasc website. It's easy found anyway. It's a specimen agreement, and as I say, you can cross out or add in anything that you kind of need after that.
Thanks, Ciaran. Look, I think we've gone through a lot of stuff there in the last hour and 10 minutes. We have gone a little bit over time. I think we've dealt with most of the questions. There might be one more question to deal with. Just one sec there now. So there's a question. Is beet and maize and silage a good combination feed to feed winter and spring dairy cows? So look, I'll answer that. And look, you know, any combination of beet or maize with grass silage works really, really well. Like beet in any case, because it's a concentrate type feed, it needs to be part of a diet with a forage feed or a roughage feed anyway. Maize works particularly well with silage, and also particularly well with grazed grass. You know, grass this time of year where animals may want to be supplemented, continue supplemented with something. Maize works really, really well with spring grass and also grass in autumn time. And again, look, if people want more information on any of those areas, just give us a shout and we'll be able to help out. So if have you anything else to add, Ciaran? Or
No, Dave, thanks. As I said, just kind of one of the first things I said, and I suppose we're all conscious of 2018, and at least we're starting a bit earlier now, and I don't know what way fertilizer will end up, but like for anybody to do a fodder budget seems an obvious thing to me, you know, to plan, and at least then, you know, you're not going to get caught at the end of the season, I suppose, really.
Yeah, look, and I would agree with that. And I would also say again, and we covered it earlier on, that look, maize and beet, they're actually very efficient users of fertilizer nutrients. So you're getting a lot of output for what you're putting in. And so from that point of view, they might be the solution for some of the problems that are there. But I agree with you that, look, a fodder budget is a key bit to try and see, are these part of it, or are there other things out there that need to be done? So with that, look, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this morning. We had a super number of people on board for the webinar. I'd like to particularly thank Ciaran for helping me out. And again, like I say, I know him for many, many years, so I know he's wide experience in all these things and a good balanced view on things as well. So with that, look, thank you, everybody, and we'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Dave.